Hello, everyone. Welcome down the hobby hole, a weekly podcast about hobbies, interests, and hyperfixation, sometimes our own, sometimes discovering new ones with guests. I'm your host, Daniel Rustage, musician, dungeon master, card game designer, and man of many hobbies, and I'm here with my co-host and best friend, Shwabadi.
Hi, I really like the Lord of the Rings.
Hey, and today, our special guest is the one and only Mr. Daniel B. Green.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to be on.
This is the most genuine you've ever sounded. Like,
ouch! Okay, I guess we're starting like that.
I just mean, like, I was so used to you being on Isekai D&D where I introduce you and you do some stupid bit. I wasn't expecting you to be like, oh, thank you so much. I appreciate, like... I saw you grab something from the table and I wasn't sure what it was, and I was like, he's gonna do some silly thing with that when I introduce him.
No, well, I'm not in the character of the shark, which I try and maintain, you know, in my good murder hobo self. Yeah. This is just, I have I keep popping my wrist because of the pain it's in from all the things I've been having to do with it. And so this is stopping me from popping it, which is apparently bad for it. It's like, are you saying that
the silly thing I thought you were going to do is actually to help with your injury?
Mark, this is the bit. It's to make Rustage feel terrible.
Yeah, it's a running bit that we have where we make Rustage feel bad about himself.
Oh, I don't need help with that.
True. Can we have a little, like, a self introduction from Daniel Green about
Daniel Green,
what it is
Daniel
you
Green. What introduce yourself to us and people who don't know who you are.
I like to think I am a booktuber who professionally geeks out about fantasy stories that I love very dearly. I got my start talking mostly about Wheel of Time because actually when I started my channel, I hadn't read many fantasy series, and a ton of people were like, hey, if you like Wheel of Time, read Brandon Sanderson, read, Greenbone Saga, read First Law, read Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire. And so I just slowly started picking up more and more fantasy books. And it went from kind of being like, watch this guy get into fantasy to watch this guy get into manga to watch this guy try and pretend to be a show reviewer. Yeah. So I try and maintain that balance of, like, taking what I do seriously, but I always want to come across as just, your friend who likes a book and wants to talk with you about it.
You're a great personality because not only are you very intelligent with what you say and talk about, but you present yourself in a very charismatic way, and your quality of your videos is very high. I think that's what's made you so successful. Is not you. I don't think I compliment you on this enough, but you genuinely you know what you're talking about, at least in my opinion, and you present it in a way that's really digestible and makes people very happy.
It's actually, like, so that's very calculated in a way, right?
Yeah, I can imagine.
I don't want to come across too professional. Like, I don't want to ever be like, I see YouTubers fall down that trap, right, where they end up looking like they're in a real studio. Like, I make sure that it always feels like I'm in my office because that's where I'm recording. It's where I edit.
It reminds me of if any of you are aware of The Professor, he's like a Magic the Gathering YouTuber, and he has. It looks like when you watch his videos that he's in, like, his living room and he has this, like, living room set, but it's not even his house. It's a studio basement that he's made the corner look like a living room. I've been there. Oh my God. And I think that's just incredible. Hilarious. And I guess it's that same sort of thing.
And I think that does end up affecting your content as well. Like, maybe not on an intentional level, but like a subtle level. Like, if you do build out a whole studio and you get that level of professionalism, like, I think at the end of the day, it's going to reflect what you say because you're going to feel that. And I know, I'm not going to name names, but like a history YouTuber has now made it so he's no longer really even the YouTuber. He's a CEO and he's managing people. He's hiring and firing, dealing with all that.
I could never do that. Nope. I would never get to that because. What did Tom Scott say? He's like, once you get to a certain point, you either become a manager or you have to slow down. And it's like, I'd sooner slow down than become a manager.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is a thing in the music side. I imagine it is, but, like, at a certain point, you get approached by agents and managers, and they start offering you deals and stuff.
You get approached by like music. I get emails from people who are like, we're this music label. We think you have a lot of potential, and it's like, bitch, I've already made it. I don't need you.
Again, I got sent a contract once because they did a really good job sweet talking me into being like, we can help you, like, maybe get like a TV hosting gig, stuff like this. And I was like, neat, I'll at least let these people represent me, whatever. But I made it clear, like, you're not touching my book sales, you're not touching my channel revenue, you're not touching my sponsor stuff. If you get me a job, you get a cut of that. and they sent me a contract that they just lied, and everything in the contract was like, we get a cut of everything, and they were just hoping I wouldn't read it, I guess. And it was also full of spelling mistakes. So like if anyone's thinking about getting into content creation, do not give up your power. Like content creators 100%. Have so much power, and there are people who will try and leech that, and it's a big problem.
I've never done a sponsorship. Never.
I've done a lot. I've done a lot. I would sometimes they will try and like scalp you for more than they are worth. And you're like, oh god.
And there's so many who are like, I'm not going to send you a sample of our product, and I'm like, then I'm not going to put it on my channel. Like, with you.
All right. Well, this episode is about fantasy books.
This isn't the content creator.
This is the
I'm sure we could do something like that.
I got into reading fantasy books because of Daniel Green, sort of. Like, I was always interested in it as a concept, and I'd read books before and sort of, skirted around it. But it was Daniel Green. I think you did a video with Murphy where you're like, best fantasy books for different levels of reader, like best beginner fantasy book, and you recommend Mistborn as your best beginner fantasy book for people who haven't read fantasy before, and that's what made me read Mistborn. And then I loved Mistborn. I remember getting to the end of it and being like, is this what reading is like? And I just sort of dived headfirst. And so it feels very special to have you on this episode, because you are the inception of the hobby for me, I think.
I stand by that recommendation still to this day, as Mistborn being a phenomenal entry point, not only because I think it's a ridiculously digestible fantasy book, but Sanderson's also still the hottest name.
That's how you convinced me, I think, because I'll be honest, it wasn't the first one I tried, because the first video I watched was your top 10. Or whatever it was at the time, and you had Wheel of Time as your number one. So I was like, well, if he thinks this is the best, I'm going to try. And I was like reading it, and I was like, I can't get into this. What is wrong with me? So it was because you said it was easy to read. I was like, maybe I'm an idiot, and I need the easy to read one. And I read it. And it's one of those interesting things that now that I've read more, when I go back to Sanderson's writing, I'm like, oh, I see what he means now.
Yeah.
I'm like more accustomed to it, but it's such a good way to intro someone into it.
And I think that's actually like you've hit the nail on the head of why Sanderson is so popular. Like no matter what he's writing, it's insanely easy to read and enjoy, and you don't have this like higher ask that you get from a lot of authors where their prose
most important thing about most hobbies, and especially reading, is just as long as you enjoy it, right? There shouldn't really be any sort of elitism with it unless the text is actively harmful, right?
Oh, I can speak on that.
Oh gosh.
But do you want to? I'm quite interested in like how you got into reading Mr. Daniel Green, because
my dad's a gargantuan nerd. He is a jack of all trades kind of person. He's someone who has a million different hobbies, but throughout his whole life, he's been a huge sci-fi fantasy fan.
Yeah.
And so when I was a little kid, before I could even walk, he was, sitting there reading me The Hobbit. And eventually, when I got old enough, I wanted to find my own fantasy series that wasn't from my dad. He had read me His Dark Materials, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, the real staple stuff. But I decided, okay, I want to pick one up. And I had no idea how big of a commitment it was, but I picked up The Wheel of Time. I think I was around 12.
Yeah.
And I didn't even realize I grabbed the first book. I just found a pretty book with a bluish cover, and blue is my favorite color. That's the eye of the world. So I got through the first 4 books in that and just fell completely in love.
Yeah, I can imagine why it's so important to you then.
I didn't have I had a good childhood, but there was bad times, like things, parents split and everything, and it was my escape. It was where I went to kind of just exist and not have to deal with being an awkward kid who didn't make friends easy and was super dyslexic, and it helped me practice reading. And so after a lot of just getting into Wheel of Time, I kind of thought like this is the best fantasy series. Nothing will ever touch it. So I had no interest in reading anything else. But I eventually started making videos about Wheel of Time, and there were so many people who were like, read this, read that, try this.
Yeah.
And so I was like, why would I read anything that's not Lord of the Rings, Wheel of Time, or like Harry Potter at the time was, something I loved a lot. And then, I started picking things up, and
this is crazy how similar this is to Totally Not Mark with anime, where he's like, he's really into Dragon Ball, and then he made videos about it, and then everyone was like, you should watch this and read this. And then he watched a bunch of anime and stuff as an adult.
That became his content.
Yeah, that became his content, yeah. And it,
so funny.
We all have our gateway drug series.
I mean, a lot of people, I think, read a decent amount as children, and then they have this period of time where they don't read, and then they pick it back up as an adult. That's at least for me. Like as a kid, I read Darren Shan, which is like,
dude.
Yeah, right. Oh my gosh, I love Darren Shan. It's like imagine it's the same sort of target demographic as like Percy Jackson or Harry Potter, but instead of wizards or gods, it's vampire. So the kid's like a vampire, and he's British, right? So I don't think a lot of Americans will know it, but it's I was obsessed with Darren Shan as a kid, and then there was another series called like Gone, which was like also kind of fantasy. It's very Lord of the Flies-esque. Shwabadi, how did you get into reading?
Well, like you say, it was like as a kid, there was a bunch of books I was really into. Me and my brother always bought books together, and the big ones were the Darren Shan, Demonata, and the Vampire series, both of those. Yeah. And yeah, I was more into series or movies. Sorry, so Lord of the Rings was since I watched it. I watched it when it came out in 2001, and since then, I was like 6 when it came out, but I was just obsessed with it because I watched it with my parents.
I have watched 2 of the movies now. Last time we all talked about Lord of the Rings, I said I've never watched or read them. I've watched the first 2, the 2. I have not watched the third one.
Do you get it now?
Are you enjoying it?
I am enjoying it. I think I wish I watched it when I was younger because I think I would have enjoyed it more. I understand why people enjoy it more.
True.
I think it's one of those things where because it's the pioneer of so many fantasy tropes and stuff, that you recognize that, and it becomes a little bit more like predictable.
I mean, we talked about this with like you reading Agatha Christie novels, and you can see how much it's influenced every crime thriller since then. Yeah. It's the same thing with Lord of the Rings.
I totally get but there are aspects of it I didn't expect, and also I've tried my best to be spoiler free, but there's just stuff that's in the cultural osmosis that it comes up, and I'm like, oh okay, this would have been cool if I didn't know this.
Everyone's heard Gandalf the White. When Gandalf the Gray goes away, you're like, oh yeah, I know, okay.
Yeah, actually, I didn't. No. Actually, that was one I didn't know. That was one I didn't know, but it's one that I predicted because I was like, it was so. To me, it felt obvious. But
it did not feel. I will say, watching it as a kid, that was like a ground-shattering moment.
Yeah.
For me, like watching that as a kid, I was like, oh my god.
Yeah.
And they killed the wizard.
It's cliche to say at this point, but like it did invent the genre as it's understood today. There is really nothing like Lord of the Rings before it. He translated stuff like Beowulf, and that's what inspired him to just go off and make this thing. And it is like there was some parallel stuff happening around the same time. Like there were authors who were doing similar attempts, but it's also the fact that what Tolkien wrote is just amazing. There was other attempts at epic fantasy, but he really showed the potential of making this whole other world that has its own mythology and history. And I love the story of him trying to get it published, because it's so hard for him to make publishers understand what he's doing, because they're like, what, there's a history book you want to put out? It's crazy.
That's so funny.
That's sort of the thing. Sometimes the most successful things are things that like business people won't do. And because it's like, this is not trying to test it. This is so off topic, but the TV show Taskmaster is like this, where they have the same contestants on each episode for a series. And when they originally tried to pitch this, like companies would be like, what do you mean? You want the same, people are going to be bored. They would want different contestants for each episode, and they wouldn't do it. But then I think Dave picked it up and they did it, and then it ended up being one of the most successful British comedy panel show things. I don't know if you've ever seen it, Mr. Green. I recommend it if you haven't. And now, because of that, other TV shows like Richard Osman's House of Games also do the thing where they have the same contestants on all week. So you need those groundbreaking shows. And that's the sort of frustrating things about creatives versus businesses, is that business people will see things that are successful and they're like, we need more of that. But sometimes the most successful thing is something that hasn't been successful in the past.
Hasn't been done before.
Or hasn't been done before. That feels illogical. 100%.
Yeah, I completely agree. Excuse me, I just burped right in the mic. I apologize.
Okay.
I'm drinking a carbonated beverage. And I maintain if Tolkien was trying to put out Lord of the Rings today, he'd have to indie publish. Like if he hadn't invented the genre, we were in a similar situation, he would have to. Because one, there's so much more competition to put out books right now. But the amazing thing is he set the bar high for fantasy, right? Like people wanted to write in that prose, that fully immersive, just new world with history. And for decades, I mean, the fantasy genre slowly changed. You see what it got to in like the 80s, where there's the Conan stuff going on, and transitioning into the 90s when you have kind of the boom of the internet starting to let people put things out that are just on my blog somewhere, and that's morphed now into this more regimented version of indie publishing we have. And I love it. I think we're right now in the most delicious time to be a sci-fi fantasy fan, because you can find the most specific niche genre. Like if you want, there is a guy putting out a book traditionally published right now that is fungal punk. It is fungus-based punk fantasy. I forget the name of it off the top of my head.
Yeah, I like that.
Great.
I think
that is reaching trad publish. So online, there's there's stuff that's named like I got turned into a vending machine and now I have to survive a dungeon crawl.
Yeah. I think ironically, if you really want to copy Lord of the Rings, you have to make something that's nothing like Lord of the Rings, right? Because that's what made it so good, is because it's the pioneer of so many fantasy things.
And pioneering interestingly right now means you got to get weird.
Lord of the Rings is what got me into like the idea of fantasy and like just that whole setting and everything. I was obsessed with all throughout my childhood, but I didn't read a lot until Game of Thrones came out as a TV series, and then I watched the first season of that. I was like, I really like this. I'm going to read the books. And that's what got me back into sort of reading.
Yeah.
Because I kind of did it out of spite, because everyone I went to university with was like, dude, it's like the new Lord of the Rings. It's like a modern Lord of the Rings. It's like a better take on Lord of the Rings. I was like, first of all, what the fuck are you talking about? You don't know what the hell you're talking about. Shut up. I'm going to read these books. And I sort of like read it out of spite, but I really, really enjoyed it. It's just, I think it was unavoidable that people are going to compare it to that just because it's massive flagship.
If you think about
fantasy.
like, and I don't mean this in like a derogative way, but like a lot of casual readers of stuff are going to only know the things that are in the cultural osmosis. They're going to think Lord of the Rings is the only fantasy series that's like popular and exists. So when there's another fantasy series that's popular and exists, they'll be like, this is like Lord of the Rings, but cool.
That's actually
what's interesting is I feel like.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I feel like A Song of Ice and Fire is the first in a while to be a popular fantasy series.
Yeah.
Like, me and my friends who only really know about, like, the mainstream surface stuff back when I was in college, like, the type of shit that we would hear about, like, that's the first in ages.
Yeah.
I agree and disagree, because this is kind of a fight I've been going on for a long time when it comes to what I consider fantasy. So I make the case that Star Wars was a fantasy series skinned as science fiction that was just as popular. And then I also maintain that Stephen King has largely been a fantasy author who has had some of the greatest films of all time adapted from him that are fantasy films. Like The Shining is a ghost story, and I'm sorry, I'm an adult, I don't believe in ghosts. And so to me, that's a fantasy thing. And so is all of his work with the extra-dimensional demon and it and the giant turtle braiding life. I'm like, that's a fantasy. And it's
that's what's so interesting about the label fantasy, is that it doesn't mean anything. It invokes a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but it doesn't strictly mean anything in itself.
It doesn't have to just mean like Euro medieval sorcerers.
I'm thinking like Eurocentric medieval swords and sorcery. Like that's the fantasy that like I love. That's like my lifeblood. But I love fantasy in its widest scope as well.
What I love about fantasy specifically is a lot of it is like quite interesting political stories without needing to do like, because real life politics is boring because it affects us. You know what I mean? But I'm super and like I don't give a shit. Like I don't want to read about Russia. I want to read about Avutania and like what they're doing. Like, and you get that interesting political thriller and all of these stuff that's why I really like low fantasy. Is that the term? Like ground where there isn't actually even that much magic, right? It's like a Joe Abercrombie where it's just because it's this interesting, unique world. We'll talk about Joe Abercrombie in a second when we move on to our favorites, but I like it because it's this unique, interesting world, but it's just characters in a fantasy setting and how they react to the world around them, and that I love.
I actually agree completely. The only part that I disagree with is that it doesn't need to be low fantasy in my opinion.
It definitely could work in a high fantasy setting, and that could sometimes be more interesting. To see how the magic interacts with the world.
Yeah, and the older you get, the more you realize so many stories are trying to make grand political points. I don't think Tolkien really was. I mean, he has his totally misused quote on allegory all the time, but like his Dark Materials, that is a giant middle finger to organized religion. And it was from its inception and continues to be to this day. And I didn't realize that when my dad read it to me when I was a child, but rereading it, I think when I was like 14, 15, I was like, oh, why were the Harry Potter people mad at Harry Potter and not this? Like, this is so aggressively aimed at them. And so and then that transitions, I think, wonderfully into First Law. Is got a whole lot of, I wouldn't call them political, but I would say it's got a lot of moral points.
But I'm not even saying political in terms of it's trying to say something. I'm saying political in terms of like the politics of the world, like backstabbing, and this king is doing this with this person, and it's that whole interesting dynamics between all the different moving parts. I've not read or watched Game of Thrones because I'm waiting for it to finish before I read it, but I assume that's very similar.
You're never going to read it. I hate to break it to you. That's not going to happen. That's a wonderful way to say, hey, I just don't want to read Game of Thrones, is to just say I'm waiting for it to be finished.
I know nothing. Like, I'm so spoiler-free on Game of Thrones. I've done such a good job because I do want to read it one day when he finishes it.
I think it's a fantastic read.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very like, the politics and interweaving.
I don't even know the names of any characters.
You're a court fantasy fan, Rustage. You like court fantasy. I like that. That's interesting.
I like. Oh, there goes my light. I like court fantasy, and I guess I just like very character-driven fantasy. Is what I've discovered.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk.
I think we're all big into character-driven things, right?
Let's talk about favorites. Mr. Daniel Green?
Mm-hmm.
You have videos on this, so it's whatever. But what is your favorite fantasy book of all time?
I can make this breaking indifferent because I've had one that just shot its way into my top 5.
Let's say that isn't the Wheel of Time then. You can talk about the Wheel of Time though if you want.
No, I would say a favorite of mine right now today is Sun Eater. Sun Eater has just
that's what I'm reading next.
Its way
Do you know, I saw literally 20 minutes ago, I saw a Reddit post that was just like, why does everyone like this book? like it's like I feel like I'm reading a different book. This book's garbage, and I'm interested in, tell me why, without spoilers, of course. Tell me on Sun Eater.
So first of all, I want to say anyone's allowed to like or not like a book.
Oh, yeah,
it's all about whether
100%.
or not you connect with an author. And so I always, whenever I see a post that's like, I saw one that was like, why is Jade City popular? It's ass. And I read through the post and I was like, I get why this person doesn't like Jade City. I think it's perfect.
Yeah.
But I get it.
Yeah.
So Sun Eater, I think by its very conception is going to be polarizing because Christopher Rocchio is unabashedly doing Dune. Like he's like, I'm going to do Dune again, and I'm going to make it much more about following intensely this character in a first-person perspective.
Oh, it's first person?
Yes.
Interesting.
And I am going to show you what it would really be like to follow someone who's going to be a sci-fi Alexander the Great. What does it take as an individual to become someone who can conquer an empire, who can become that? And in like your immediate reaction, it's like, oh, it's going to be a really amazing man. No, it's a deeply flawed person who can do that. It's not a good person who's like, I can bathe the stars in blood. Like that's a horrendous monster. But he's also super charismatic. So you're following a deeply flawed guy who makes horrible decisions, but he's charismatic, and I love charismatic villains or really protagonists. Like, you can make the case for Hadrian either way because he's literally fighting in an allegory for a Nazi empire in space. And at first, he's like, I hate this empire, but as he gets more powerful, he's like, I kind of love them because they give me power.
That's interesting. Yeah, I've never been one for like first person fantasy because I just love the multiple perspectives in fantasy because of the political way that works, but. I mean, I've been reading The Will of the Many, and that's first person, and I can see how you can do it well. You get a lot of it's that one thing about books that I feel like it's really difficult to translate into movies and TV shows is being able to go inside a character's head, like their thoughts, right? Yeah. It's what it's what makes a lot of these books so good. Shogun, which is historical fantasy, is really good because of that as well, because it's the interworkings of the thoughts of the characters versus what they actually say. Gerald Crummy does that well. So, I mean, you've sold me on it. I'll read it. It's my next book.
Well, what is the first book in the Sun Eater series?
Empire of Silence. And I want to maintain, do not expect to like Hadrian. And the entire first book, he's a whiny little arse. Like he is, you're just looking at him. And I said he gave me like the vibes of that prince from Monty Python, the Holy Grail, who's just like yearning out the window. And I'm like, I wanted to start backhanding him. But by like the fifth book, he feels like a god. But he's also so grounded. Like, that's the balance of being able to create someone who's able to be at a 10 and feel like this force of will, but because you saw them come up from the bottom. And it's also super indulgent. I love a series that's willing to be like, and now he's a gladiator, because it's cool. Like, that's awesome. And so, and when I've read so many books and I find something that is really well written, Christopher Rocchio deeply is indulgent with his prose, and I enjoy that. It's very Rothfuss, and especially because I've been reading a whole lot of, I would say, just averagely written books, right? It's like my writing level. I'm an average author. I can't do really fancy stuff, but it felt kind of really different on the palate to have someone who's willing to bring in some $5 words and amp it up and really kind of make it a beautiful experience in multiple ways.
Yeah.
Well,
that sounds awesome.
Yeah. Mark, what would you say your favorite fantasy book is of all time?
I'm going to surprise everyone by not saying
Rustage has been eaten by the void.
Sorry,
there we go.
my battery ran out. I'm back.
Rustage was fighting with a camera while we were listening to Daniel Green describe his book series. I'm going to surprise everyone by not saying Lord of the Rings. I love Lord of the Rings to death, but not necessarily for the books in of themselves. It's like the greater context and the world. And
Yeah.
So I must say my favorite strictly fantasy book. Oh gosh.
I do want to clarify. Sun Eater is sci-fi fantasy. There are fantasy elements like eldritch gods outside of time and stuff, but it is sci-fi fantasy. I want to make that clear.
Yeah. It is. It's just so hard for me to pick.
If you got it, I'll say mine, and then
if you've got one, go ahead. And I'll think.
Honestly, it is just Joe Abercrombie. I absolutely adore, because I'm such a character reader. I think his characters are incredible, and I've never before really experienced a story like his where I would describe it as, when you read a lot of books, fantasy books or whatever, you know that there's like a protagonist. It's like you feel like it's going to go one or two ways. Obviously, there's stuff that's going to happen, but either the protagonists win or the villains win, and it's like, which story is this going to be? But the thing about Joe Abercrombie is nobody's the protagonist. They're just people that live in this universe, and so some of them will win, some of them won't, some will. It's like, it's just seeing what happens, and that makes it really unpredictable in a really exciting way. And it is like, at its core, a character-driven, in my opinion, political thriller where it's like all of these characters are doing things that are affecting the world and they affect each other, and it's and as you get more invested in the world, I think this is with every fantasy book series, you just start becoming more and more interested in what these characters are doing. And Joe Abercrombie's writing style is so good for that, and the Stephen Pacey audiobooks are just incredible as well.
Oh, Stephen Pacey. He is
so good.
He is
absolutely amazing.
Venom.
Yeah, I'd say
I might just have to say Joe Abercrombie's saga,
it's
the Blade
so
itself and onwards is probably the best experience I've had with fantasy.
Yeah.
I listened to the audiobooks and I was enamored.
Yeah.
So for me, Joe Abercrombie, I never want to say again, you have to like a book, but if you don't at least walk away from First Law going, it's not for me, but I respect the hell out of it. To me, that comes down to did you pay attention? Because what he does with character motivations, twists, you don't have to like it, but I don't like the original Dune book, but I respect it because it's this. I actually like the sequels. I don't like Dune. We can get into that, but. It's it's immensely important, and I've said this before, and it's totally me kissing ass, but I think Joe Abercrombie is a once-in-a-generation fantasy author.
I'm despeally trying to find something that's like Joe Abercrombie's work. I want that.
Good luck.
And the thing is, The Blade itself is not going to click with a lot of people, the first book in the series, because when you finish it, you realize nothing happened. There's nothing actually happened in this book.
Yeah.
But the characters are so compelling, you don't care. And then things start to happen in the books in the future. It feels like a sort of almost like a prequel. And then, what is it? Best Served Cold is what if the Joe Abercrombie book actually had something that happened in it as well? What if it had a driving plot? And that's I think a lot of people's favorite is Best Served Cold.
Yes.
I think it's toss up between that, Last Argument of Kings, and Wisdom of Crowds for me especially. I really like Wisdom of Crowds. I love the sequel trilogy. It's very rare that you have a series where they're like the new generation of characters. A lot of them are the kids of the older ones. And it's either just as good or potentially better.
I would say it's better.
Yeah.
Because one, he's kept his best characters around. No spoilers. I'm not going to say who, but a lot of the people you love in the first generation are here.
I would say that the experience is ever so slightly sullied because of something Daniel Green said to me. He inadvertently spoiled me on one of the twists.
No,
I know, but it's okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. But besides that, I still really enjoyed it. And
it's also like there is like when you talk about fantasy books, you just need to also talk about like boiling away the genre, the craft of writing.
Yes.
And the fact that his first book, he has no trunk novels, is the first law book hurts. That is so impressive.
It's so good.
So unfair.
Yeah.
It's like, God damn, dude.
Me and Mark are going to do a first law wrap at some point. It's on the cards. We're going to do it. We're very excited to do it. But it's
you have to include the like, what is it, like lift, tap, click or something like that? You have to put that into the beat or something.
You know what? I genuinely say on a day-to-day basis, like it's better to do something than live with the fear of it constantly. Like using people. If anyone's like, "Oh, I really don't want to do this," I'm like, it's better to do something than live with the fear of it. It's how I stop procrastinating. Big up Logan.
I feel like Joe Abercrombie does also understand how people work in a way that really comes across well on the page. Because like there's authors I like I don't love Kingkiller Chronicles, but I appreciate them for what they are. But I don't feel like Patrick Rothfuss writes in a way that has a very good understanding or grasp of how people really would react in a situation. Abercrombie's characters have this ability where it's like they're over the top. Like no one you meet in the real world is going to be like Klokta.
Yeah.
But once you understand Klokta, everything he does makes perfect sense. Like he falls into that slot so comfortably.
A lot of books will, or like even shows will have the thing where they have a flawed protagonist or a redeemable villain, but the Joe Abercrombie characters are not that. They're not in those boxes. They're just guys. They're just guys. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Like they have flaws, they have positive traits, but it's like they're not something but something. They're just them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like
no, for sure.
I feel like the sort of the same premise. We were talking about slightly before the episode started. The Jade Legacy characters are similar to that as well. I think.
Yeah.
They're a little bit more like you know who the protagonists are, but like it's still the characters are very good.
Yeah, they have that very.
I mean, I'm not saying you know who the good guys are, but you know who the protagonists are, is what I mean.
Well, I think the first book does a pretty big subversion on that.
I agree with that. True. But I meant like the family as a whole, like the main family. You know that family is the protagonist family. Right?
Yeah. Or the antagonist family, however you want to look at it.
I'm not saying they're the good guys or the villains, but they are the protagonist family.
Sorry. How uncomfortable can I make Rustage talking about these books?
No, but I love...
Greenbone Trilogy is really interesting to me.
It's one of those ones that gets better. I still prefer Abercrombie, and I was really excited to read the last book because people like Daniel Green, when they did their like best books I read this year, they put Wisdom of Crowds and Jade Legacy on this. They were like, I can't decide between the two. I can. I think Wisdom of Crowds is better, but it's what... That specifically, that agreed. You specifically saying that is what made me read it, because I'm just like if they're like if you can't put these apart, and I love that book, I'm gonna like this. And I agree. I think Jade Legacy is the best of the three. It's one of those series that gets better with me. I think Jade City's good, but in like the first half, I wasn't really like it didn't click with me quite until I got through it. If that made sense, like I would sort of go BAS in terms of the book series, like if I were to rank them all. Like they would sort of climb up.
And I think what drew me into the Greenbone saga from day one was I saw that this was going to be a story that on the bigger picture is about how a criminal lifestyle is addictive and it's a whirlpool and it will suck you down into it.
Yeah,
and so
the setting
really
is
got
incredible.
Yeah.
The world, like a lot of, we were talking earlier about Euro medieval fantasy, but the Jade series, for people who don't know, is set in a sort of post-war fantasy Japan. It's like it's like post-World War II era technology at the start of the books. Would you agree?
I would say it's also important to realize that there is it's a very distinct handling of the fantasy elements within that time period as well. It's urban fantasy, no question, but there's this magic that is acting as a resource that is how these crime families are operating, which I think is very reflective of political issues in that peri of that time, and the way that is utilized to enhance the world building and kind of make you feel this economy of magic that then funds all this crime. It just works. Like, it's so cohesive. Like, you just believe it. You believe that premise because of how it's written.
No, I really, really enjoy it a lot. Mark, what is your favorite fantasy book? Or what would you say? I think Mark's having his internet issue he was warning us about.
Daniel Green. Sun Eater's not my all-time favorite.
No,
I just didn't want to talk about Wheel of Time.
You can tell us why you like Wheel of Time so much, besides it having that emotional connection for you.
Oh, God. I mean, I could list off a trillion different reasons. I think it is the best handling of a Chosen One idea, period. Like, in terms of Chosen Ones, there is no one more fascinating to me than Rand al'Thor, which I don't want to get into spoilers, but to me, Robert Jordan is the most effective example of showing how
I still got to do that
pressure...
song for you.
You're totally good.
You need to, notify me. You need to be on my ass about things so I
just didn't want to bug you.
No, you can bug me whenever.
The pressure of being told you are the chosen one would break anybody. Yeah. No one would handle that well. End of story. And that's what makes Rand, in my opinion, the most compelling chosen one ever, because he fails for 90% of the series. Yeah. And it's not until a certain point that he's able to get his shit together. And even for a big chunk of him failing, his whole mentality is like, well, I'm going to go die. That's how he handles his life.
Mark, we were asking you whilst you were lagged out, what is your favorite book? Is it fantasy series? Is it Joe Abercrombie, or is it was it between?
It probably is. My favorite single book that I've read was The Hobbit.
Yeah.
But as a series, Joe Abercrombie's 9-book saga just dominates everything when I think of fantasy.
That your favorite manga series and your favorite book series were both ones that I introduced you to?
Oh, damn!
Yeah, probably.
Rustage is goated with the Rex.
For sure. Well, previous to a lot of the modern fantasy that I know now is stuff that you've told me about. Yeah. Previous to that, a lot of stuff that I read.
I watch a Daniel Green video, I read something, I say this is good, and I recommend it to Mark, and then he reads it.
Yeah. But previous to that, the things I was reading, the way I was introduced to a lot of books was my ex was really into literature from a scholarly angle. So he read a ton of shit and would recommend me stuff based on that. And most of it I didn't like. So I kind of thought for a while I didn't like reading.
Well, we can.
But there was some highlights from that.
We can transition this to overrated or least favorite fantasy book before we get to the draft. I think that would be fun.
Yeah.
Have a little bit of negativity. It doesn't have to be what you think is the worst. It can just be what you think is, overrated. Obviously,
just whatever comes to mind.
Opinions are subjective. If you like something,
I've started having a bad relationship with this fandom. I think the Dresden Files started rough. It got great for a bit, and now it's back to being rough. And the fact that people, I was guilty of it. When it was at its peak, I was like, oh, Dresden Files is among the best. But it is so divorced from what made it great now. In my subjective opinion, I haven't liked the last 3 books, and that's literally 3 strikes that are all just not. It's they've deliberately taken steps in the narrative so that they can't go back to what made the story work for me. Yeah. So I've kind of had to just put it down and be like that. I loved half the series, but half is 50%, and I can't hold something up that high.
Hard.
Yeah.
Do you have a least favorite, Mark? Or an overrated one?
When it comes to specifically fantasy, most of what I've read has been really good.
Yeah.
So I will say this, and I don't think this is necessarily overrated because I think a lot of people hold the same opinion, but it's the sort of spin-off books to the Mistborn trilogy.
Era 2.
Right.
We did not enjoy it.
Books. I just really didn't like the shift in tone and style.
Yeah.
To be fair,
I couldn't gel with it at all.
We've only read the first one.
A lot of people I know really like that second the era. But
I remember you finishing it.
With it.
You finished reading it on my couch, and then you finished it, and you just sort of heavy sighed, and you were like, you looked me in the eyes and said, I think you said something like, has Sanderson always been this bad? like you.
It wasn't that dramatic.
You were worried because it was like you read Mistborn, then you read all the Joe Abercrombie books, and then you read this Era 2 Mistborn book, and it was just so not what you wanted. I felt the same. I was going to say something similar.
I think Era 2 is, like, just to give Sanderson credit, I think it's widely considered his least good series. There's big fans of it out there, but to me that was, though I will say his last entry, the fourth book that just came out, was good again. I really liked it.
I think people have started to enjoy it again.
Yeah, and also it tied it into Stormlight Archive and the wider Cosmere a lot, which, if you're a big Cosmere fan, is really cool to we're doing an MCU from this guy. Dope.
Yeah.
I thought the thing is, because most of the books that I read, I've extensively researched, like, if people I trust, of whether or not they like it. It's very rare that I'm going to read something I dislike. And so there's been a couple things. Like Mistborn Era 2 was one of them, and I read the first book of the Cradle series, and it just didn't click with me, and I didn't like that. So it's stuff like that.
Oh God, there's this. So you guys obviously know Discworld. You're British, and
my uncles are obsessed with it. They're like,
I think it's Discworld. It's not the best fantasy series ever. It's the most enjoyable fantasy series ever. Like, there's no question.
Yeah.
It's just happy, smart, quippy, fun.
I love whimsy. Like,
I'm a whimsy fan.
As in love with Joe Abercrombie's writing style as I am, just being able to read a book that is so silly,
fun,
but like well realized.
That is my biggest problem with sometimes is I get too emotionally invested. There was a moment, and Daniel Green will remember this. I was halfway through the sequel trilogy of Joe Abercrombie, and I messaged him saying, "This book is stressing me out too much. How do you recommend to not feel?" Because I couldn't listen or read it because I genuinely felt emotionally terrible, which is a good sign for a book in terms of, like, that's because it's well written. And post that, I'm like, that was a good experience, but like during it, I'm like, it feels like it was happening to me. So it's really fun to read something like Discworld, or it's part of the reason why I like murder mystery books, because they're just relaxing.
Yeah.
Because it's sort of like it's fun, it's whimsical. With murder mystery, it's like there's a crime, it's going to get solved. I don't have to stress about anything else.
I don't know. Have you seen Twin Peaks?
I haven't. I actually haven't.
That's one of my favorite fantastical TV shows ever, and it's about a guy showing up to an isolated place, and who killed Laura Palmer is the whole initiating question. And by season 3, you're like, who killed Laura Palmer? And David Lynch is like, we're dealing with extraterrestrial, interdimensional aliens. No one cares. Also, I kind of told you who killed Laura Palmer, and it was everybody. And you're like, I don't understand. I love that.
I need to get into it.
That's hilarious.
It's on my list.
I would not recommend it if you do not like stuff that does not make sense but is really interesting. That's Twin Peaks. It's every episode you're like, what about that plot line? And David Lynch is like, we're on new shit.
Forget about that. We're doing something else right now.
All right. Well, I guess that's okay. Let's finish off the episode with a draft. So we like to finish off episodes with drafts, and this is like a sports draft, where you're going to pick authors, and we have 4 categories, and you're trying to craft. Imagine you're a producer like DJ Khaled, but you're like making a book, and you have to. And it's 4 authors collaborating, and one of them's doing the plot, one of them's doing the world building, one of them's doing the characters, and one of them's doing the prose, and you just have to pick the authors, and we draft it. If someone else drafts something, you can't pick them, and you could choose it from any category, and we just go round like a draft.
Okay.
So we're
I'm gonna destroy this.
Yeah, you will.
I feel like Daniel Green is the most well versed. Should we leave Daniel Green for the 3rd pick?
Yeah, you know what? I will start then, and I will do Joe Abercrombie characters.
You bastard! So, you only started because you knew I was going to pick Joe Abercrombie if you let me go first.
So I'm going to do Joe Abercrombie characters. Mark, do your pick.
All right, this is what I'm going to go for. I'm going to go for prose, and I'm going to pick Terry Pratchett for prose.
All right, Mr. Green.
World building Steven Erikson, Malazan.
Ooh, strong. I'm going to do world building Sanderson.
Okay.
Imagine a book where the characters are Joe Abercrombie, but it has that like hard magic world building of Sanderson.
That'd be fun. That'd be really fun.
I feel like Sanderson is able to use the world building to make story twists. Like that's that's one of the things I loved about Mistborn, was that a lot of like the story beats are because of the world building. So that's it. I've got like every.
I'm gonna go world building as well, and I'm gonna go George R.R. Martin.
Ooh. Okay.
I really like his world and the like the politics that he's put into it and how like the history. It's just I really like how he's done all that stuff.
All right, go ahead.
And I think that'd be really fun if it was like really whimsical writing.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna go characters Kentaro Mura.
What you
can't click me. I get what you're doing here.
That's a fantasy author.
It is a fantasy author, but we had an
author.
episode about manga.
He was literally in my list.
He was in your list as well. You guys were plotting against me here.
I don't know enough fantasy authors. I have to dip into manga. Okay.
Well, I think it's like because like
Daniel Green's excuse. I don't know what that is.
Well, my excuse is he wrote one of the greatest villains ever in Griffith. He's written one of the best protagonists with guts in the relationship with everyone around him. He understands how to do subtle character work like few minds do. Like the slow build of his characters is
I agree.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
All right. Fuck, that means it's my turn. Oh gosh. Okay. You know what?
Oh, and I just want to say, I also think his characters would pair very well with a world that Erickson would build.
Cool. Plot Agatha Christie, bitch.
Christie?
Not a fantasy author, but she's doing
the. You have to come on.
But the other ones are fantasy authors, and so it's a fantasy murder mystery where the characters are written like Joe Abercrombie and the world building is like Brandon Sanderson. Are you kidding me? I would read that every day. I'd read that every day.
Okay. Well, I've got my pros and my world building already. I'm gonna go for plot, and I'm gonna go for Frank Herbert.
Okay.
Ooh,
interesting.
I think because in a George R. R. Martin type world, you have room for a really big story like that. So, and then just make it silly.
And what I like about that is specifically from Dune, I think what has aged the best is the overall plot. I think the plot of Dune holds up the best still today. That's a really solid pick with that combo. I think for I don't know if this counts. James S.A. Corey's an author duo writing under one name. Can I not do that?
Yeah, you can fucking do it.
Yeah.
Okay, then I'll do James S.A. Corey for the plot. The Expanse has one of the best plots I've seen in science fiction. So, bam.
All right. This category is the hardest for me because which I left till last is prose because I've never been one to really notice it as a more inexperienced reader compared to the likes of my peers here.
To help take the pressure off you, I think prose is the easiest category in some ways because there's so many writers that are good to great, and I don't think with this combo you can go wrong.
Yeah, but
so
that's
it's going to be those things where it's like,
that's do you know? Okay, well then I'll go with Can you give me one?
What vowel sounds are left, Rustage?
Yeah. Listen, if any of them are good, I don't want to embarrass myself by just saying it. I was going to say Fonda Lee, but it's like
you like her, right?
He's got dog shit. No, I'm kidding.
I like Fonda Lee's characters and world and stuff. Okay.
No.
Yeah, sure. We'll go.
Yeah,
with
but you
Fonda.
picked everything else, right?
Yeah, I picked everything else. My book's already good.
We've picked every author. We've picked everything else.
I meant
the
like all the other categories.
Now clean.
Fine. Phil Rustage. I'll do my dad.
Okay.
He's not a published author, but he's written books for me, and I think he has such a way with like words that are really sweet and specific for me. I think he's quite a funny Douglas Adams. I've gone with Douglas Adams. I've changed it. I've gone with Douglas Adams.
Your dad was getting like such like a nice little note for himself there.
Imagine everything I've just said. Joe Abercrombie characters. The plot is a murder mystery. It's got the world building of Sanderson, but it's got that humor writing style of Douglas Adams.
Yeah.
Bang. Perfect book. Go ahead, Mark.
That's really good. Well, that's why I had like Terry Pratchett as my pros, just because I think it would be crazy to take like the setting and the plot of like Dune set inside of Westeros is already a crazy concept, but then you write it with Terry Pratchett, and it's like, oh my god, this is wacky. Characters are the one I have left, and I'm really struggling with it. I'm torn between two, and I'm just going to say them out loud because I'm sure Daniel Green already has his, but I'm stuck between Neil Gaiman. Because we know what happens when Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett come together. We get Good Omens. And those are incredible characters. Not that I can say which one is responsible for which, but that's already good. And, Sandman and stuff. And I think he's a great character writer. But I'm also... You reminded me earlier, I've only read The Wheel of Time. of Robert Jordan's
You've read
work.
Wheel
I've
of
only read the
Time?
Wheels. I have, yeah.
Oh,
That's the only
shit!
one that I've
All right,
read
I'm
out of the
happy.
series.
Yeah.
And my favorite bit about Wheel of Time was the characters. I love the characters, so I'm really tempted to put Robert Jordan here. But you know what? I will. Robert Jordan. There you go. Character Robert
Nice.
Jordan.
All right.
Also, fuck you for taking Robert Jordan from
Yeah,
me.
yeah. You got final pick, Mr. Green.
And I have pros left, correct?
I think so. Yeah.
So for me, if you're going Erickson Malazan, you're going bonkers, crazy, hard to grasp world building that serves all kinds of incredible thematic purpose, and that's going to be wild. That's why I wanted to take the plot from. Okay, I totally blanked on who I said for plot.
Yeah, we're gonna have to recap it a bit. So.
Oh, who did I say for plot? I said
You did.
You said Mura?
That was for characters, right?
that was characters.
Oh, it
Who did I
was.
say plot?
Oh, you're fucked now because I can't remember.
Oh no! Did I
Someone from the
I
tape
said The Expanse, James S. A. Corey,
there you
which
go.
they take very big worlds and they tell really cohesive narratives, which to me is like the biggest gap for Malazan. I think Malazan's nearly perfect, but it's hard for people because it's not super cohesive. So I think they'll ground it down more. And if you take characters from Mura who are traumatized and trying to cope living in a story like this that is just so hard to even work with, who I want to tell it is someone who I find to be lethal in how they tell a story. I want someone who can go a bit flowery but also keeps it in that vein of just feeling so close to your skin and fleshy.
I'm on the edge of my fucking seat.
Yeah, you've hyped this up.
Pierce Brown, Red Rising. I think Pierce Brown, Red Rising. Because he's managed to take Darrow from someone who is like, an up and coming underdog.
Okay,
he has that Sun Eater godlike feel to
here's
him.
the thing. Those are the two series I'm debating on reading next: is Sun Eater or Red Rising. Which one do you think I should read?
They go hand in hand in a lot of ways.
I know.
I think
because I know they're both sci-fi, so I'm gonna go sci-fi next. So it's one of those two. I'm trying to decide between the two. I'm like going back and forth because you recommended both to me. You
Sun
make
Eater starts weaker, gets even better. I think Sun Eater. I think Sorry, I was actually. Go ahead. Say something you're gonna say.
What I've heard is that they both sort of start quite weak and then they get better.
Yeah. Well, you also have to remember that just also means the people who didn't like book one didn't read book two. So you're hearing from fans that book two is even better. Yeah, that's true for everything. Series.
Yeah, except for.
Here's my pitch between the two because they are very similar in a lot of ways. Sun Eater is Dune meets Red Rising. Like that's a large point of it. But Sun Eater is if you want to follow one man's first-person story of becoming a flawed prophet. That is Sun Eater. And it also veers into the fantastical at times, though you could still say we're trying to go like high concept sci-fi, but it's debatable. Red Rising is an underdog working class rebellion story that focuses much more on the war. There's war happening in Sun Eater, but it's about this individual man's spiritual quest in a lot of ways, whereas Red Rising is a war story. And that's the difference.
Yes, you've convinced me on both. Choose one for me.
Rustage. Yeah? I have bought the first Sun Eater audiobook.
We'll read Sun Eater at the same time?
So that's the next thing I'm going to listen to. Okay. So you can start that. There you go.
We'll do it at the same time.
I can say they both have magnificent narrators. I think I slightly prefer Red Rising's narrator.
Well, if you do Red Rising afterwards, if you're listening to the audiobook, Rustage, then it won't sully the narration of Sun Eater.
It's better to go up. Okay, so we'll do Sun Eater first.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, let's recap our lists, and people in the comment section or whatever will tell us which book they'd like to read the most. So mine is a Sanderson world with Abercrombie characters, an Agatha Christie plot, so it's a murder mystery.
That's fun.
And the prose is Douglas Adams, so it's funny. Mark.
That's such a crazy thing. You really tied it together with Douglas Adams because before I was like, this sounds okay. Like the Agatha Christie is fun, and then Douglas Adams
it's that thing when you get asked something, you forget everything.
Yeah, mine is a Frank Herbert plot in a George R.R. Martin world, written with the prose of Terry Pratchett and Robert Jordan characters.
Okay.
All right, Daniel Green.
I have a Steven Erikson world, which I think is the biggest point of criticism because his worlds are so big that can be a negative for some. I am a slut for big worlds. I can fit them all in me. I have a plot by James S. A. Corey, which I think The Expanse is one of the most well thought out plots ever. It's technically cheating because it's two authors, but I don't care. I have the characters of Kentaro Miura because I think he is poetic with how he will evolve characters and their relationships. And then for prose, I did Pierce Brown from Red Rising, because he has this hyper digestible but lethal, poetic-ish, visceral way of describing everything from action to love that I think connects for so many people, and it's why Red Rising is so popular.
I'm so mad you took Miura from me.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So I thought I was going totally outside the park. No one would have thought that.
I had it written down. I was like, okay.
Well, thank you guys for listening, coming down the hobby hole with us. Thank you, Mr. Daniel Green, for being here and guesting. I hope you had a good time.
Such a pleasure.
Had a wonderful time.
Do you have any other hobbies that aren't fantasy related?
Oh,
I'm not saying that as like a critic. I'm saying, do you? So.
Oh, yeah. I am very big into true crime. I am actually a true crime fanatic. I just keep that away from my channel because I do not like monetizing everything.
If we do a true crime podcast, we'll get you on in the future.
There you go.
Yeah.
Did you want to plug your work? Because you've talked about YouTube at the beginning of this episode. You haven't really talked about your writing.
We got to give them the opportunity to plug themselves. You're a professional, Mark. You're a professional.
As like homework for this episode, I was like, I know, I'll get Daniel Green's audiobooks and I'll listen to them before the episode. I forgot to listen to them.
But he has them.
I have them like all now though.
Most authors don't care if you listen or read their stuff. You as long as you buy it. You know?
Yeah, exactly. I will say, jump straight to Neon Ghosts. I've improved a lot, and I think people should start my work at Neon Ghosts, which leads nicely to a plug. I just put out a book. I'm actually just getting done signing all the ones for the Kickstarter. It's called Neon Ghosts. The audiobook and the ebook is available right now. I haven't announced this anywhere else, but I finally won the fight with my publisher. We're pulling it from Kindle Unlimited before too long, so it'll be available everywhere ebooks are sold. Really happy I won that fight, because Jeff Bezos can suck my balls. And sorry, I don't mean to get political. Sorry.
I have the version that has all the errors in it, which is great. I got the error version, which I will also be selling.
And then, I'm on YouTube, Daniel Green. I talk about books. I just put out a review of Iron Widow, which was a fun discussion. And if you ever want to find a book that I recommend, I'm your guy. That's who I try to be.
He's the guy.
There we go.
Trust. All right. Thank you. Goodbye.